You're listening to the A to Z of Human Performance live show weekdays at 13:30 GMT with Chris Lissaman and resident expert Jonna Sercombe. Plus world famous Steve Eaton is with us. Please enjoy responsibly. Here he is, the host of the show, Chris Lissaman.
Welcome to show 16, everybody. I'm delighted to have you with us again for another show. We're here every day in January, 13:30 GMT, and we're going to stick around a little bit of February as well to get through the whole of the A to Z, which we've been going through this month. Delighted to be joined by Steve as well as Jonna. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Great to have you on the show.
Performance coach, Steve Eaton. What a man. World renowned.
And this week, we're going to be covering a range of topics this week. We've got Powerful Planning and Prioritisation, which is a tongue twister, if I can get that out, which we're going to be talking through today. Quality questions tomorrow. Responsibility, resilience, and the rough stuff is our topic for Wednesday. Thursday, we're going to be looking at slips, setbacks, and sucking it up. And then Friday, teamwork and togetherness is our tea topic to close out the week. But for today, powerful planning and prioritisation. Jonna, is the age-old adage true that if we fail to plan, we plan to fail?
Were you a Boy Scout, Chris?
I was, yeah.
Girl Guide, yeah. Steve? Boy Scout?
Yeah.
Be prepared. No?
Did.
I mean, I think we can't not plan. The human brain, we run through scenarios in our mind. We've got this ability to think ahead, and there's very few animals that have really high level cognitive planning skills, but this ability to think ahead is part of what makes us a human being. We can imagine the future. I think part of our downfall sometimes is we think that because we can imagine it, it's going to happen, and we forget the very hard amount of work that needs to happen to make our dreams come true. But we have some incredible planning skills, don't we? I mean, just think what it took to get to letter P of the A to Z of Human Performance. We had to write a book, had to plan all the chapters, think about what each sentence was going to have, design it. We've had to create the idea of live shows, invite Steve. Steve's here. He had to have his breakfast, get dressed. I mean, the volume of small amounts of planning needed to get to do anything is huge. And so it's vitally important. Does it mean we fail if we don't plan? No, I don't think it does. I think often some of the very best things happen to us when we don't plan. I don't know what you think, Steve. Great moments when you didn't plan?
Yeah, I do. I do agree. I think being prepared is really, really important. I think it's really, really important from a confidence perspective as well. And I think, there's the old adage, if you think you can, think you can't, you're right. I think, a quote by Henry Ford, I think, in getting your head set right, a lot of the time does require a little bit of planning, dare say a little bit of planning, but I think, in building confidence and going forwards, I think certainly planning is really important.
It's an important tool, isn't it?
You mentioned the Scout motto there, be prepared. We're always being told to be prepared. Some things, though, as you say, are better unprepared. We can do things on the fly. When should we be investing our attention into planning, and when can we just wing it?
Well, I think we should look at the psychology. There's two different types of personality on the Myers-Briggs scale. Some who prefer more spontaneity in their life, and some who prefer more planning. And I think that for those who are more spontaneous, enough planning can help. So those should be disciplined. But I do think for those who are naturally very planned, sometimes there's too much planning. So I think it depends on our natural predisposition. For some people, go into too much detail and too much planning with insufficient openness to the unexpected. And for others of us, we could benefit from more planning. I'm definitely the spontaneous type. So I benefit a lot from doing more detailed planning, but that's because my natural predisposition is not to do that much detailed planning at all. I'd love to wing it if I could. I don't know about you, Steve. What's your natural predisposition, Steve? Are you a detailed planner or a winger?
See, I don't agree with this.
Don't agree?
And stuff.
Oh, that's good. Let's have a debate. What do you think?
No, I don't know. I'm not wholly bought in, I must admit, to the whole Myers-Briggs piece. And I think we can go off down little channels that we feel comfortable in. I don't think they're necessarily what we are predisposed. I think we can, I believe, create those predispositions. So so I don't know. I think we have a way that we possibly prefer, but that might be to do with comfort. I don't think it's naturally, you're not born with those things. I think, you could be, get yourself into it, or, from a family setting, you could be.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anchored in personality and
pushed into
unchangeable.
that
It can be
way.
a trait.
So, I always try to encourage people to try and, sometimes if that's the way they do something, it doesn't always work. Well, how about trying something else, changing your habits, and I think when it comes to, you mentioned the whole psychology of things, when it comes to things like resilience, flexible thinking and is, one of the sort of the benefits of maintaining resilience is that ability to be flexible thinking. And I think somewhere, somebody would put it down as one of the definitions of resilience. It's having the ability to maintain flexible thinking when everything else is going crazy around you. So I suppose we can all have various toolboxes, here and there that help us maintain our way through. But I think just being able to sort of stay cognizant of when you're in sort of challenging times, I think is really important. And I think, certainly when things aren't going according to plan, having the ability to stay in, keep the blood in the front of the brain so that you can think your way out of a problem, think your way, be creative, be compassionate, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Do you think, Steve, just to go, do you think that you're able to use your cognitive functions more readily when you have a base level of plan in place and you thought things through? But for me, I find that really helps. So I find, if I've mentally rehearsed something, if I've thought through scenarios, then when I'm actually under pressure, rather than trying to have to innovate and think what to do, I've actually got more capacity to be flexible, to be adaptable.
Yeah.
I think that for me would be one of the high performance strategies, just to do all the planning and all the practice and all the training and all the mental rehearsal and have all the resources, knowing that you've done everything that's within your control. Then when a setback comes, then you've got some more capacity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would say, come back to sort of, the high performance piece and the resilience piece, I suppose, even taking things back to base level, really, where, when we talk about, breathing strategies to overcome, challenges, even in the most challenging environments. So if you, rather than thinking about, oh my God, I'm struggling at the moment, I need to breathe, if you can create a habit, which the first thing you do is breathe out, for instance, then you are straight away getting yourself into that piece where you're able to keep the blood in the front of the head, i.e. keep your cognitive ability. So by planning, by preparing, by learning to create these little habits, you can actually maintain your confidence, because you know that regardless of what happens, even in the most challenging environments, as I say, that if the worst comes to the worst, I can give it best shot at getting out of the situation I'm in.
Yeah, so there's a kind of replanning that's going on with resilience. It's having an expectation, but then when that doesn't come about, you're able to shift and find a new plan and replan your route.
Yeah, I think that's why I think some people, whether it's personality or not, I think some people's predisposition or habit is to overplan, and when they're then under pressure, they go and try to make a more detailed plan. And so I think it's a strengths overdone situations. Sometimes it can be, the reliance or dependence on a plan can actually, or the need to plan can take away that cognitive ability to respond.
Yeah, there's a saying in the military actually that no plan survives the first contact, i.e. you can plan a mission as much as you want, but as soon as you get on the ground and the situation is different, or as soon as the bullets start flying, so often the plan, everything you were there to do, changes. And it's a really useful way of looking at something, so you can plan to a degree where you are comfortable in being able to maintain that flexibility. And I think that sometimes, I think in life, that's a really good way to be. You can try and plan life, but life gets in the way and everything changes all the time. So trying to be able to be somebody that can be, to plan to a point where you're confident, and then just go with it, because things are likely to change as you go.
And we're in a situation at the moment, aren't we, where the world's circumstances have thrown up a situation we couldn't plan for, and people have said time and time again, this is something we just couldn't have seen coming, couldn't have planned for. Jonna, as a business leader, how do you plan for situations like this? Can you, should you, and how do you plan for the year ahead?
They're all very good questions. I think as a business leader, you can and should plan for a variety of business interruptions. I used to be the disaster recovery officer for my department, and I had a big proper job, and I had to attend every couple of months a meeting where we each got out a very thick document that said what would happen if something went wrong, various things from our offices burning down to ceasing of trade. I used to run the some programs for Morgan Stanley, actually, where I had to help them work through what their disaster recovery plan was. And I remember very clearly that if the building was out of action due to some kind of event like a terrorist attack, everyone was supposed to meet at the disaster recovery meeting zone at Billingsgate Fish Market near Canary Wharf. And they also had a whole nother office kitted out with no one in it, just empty desks ready to carry on trading. And they had the digital plan. So we can do scenario planning, and I guess all businesses should do that. We all in our personal finances or our corporate finances should stress test those, and we should also think as well about how committed or overcommitted we are. And again, this is a huge one when difficult things happen. If we're really overcommitted in life, then we can't adapt quickly enough when something goes wrong. So, for example, if one of our family members were to get extremely sick, if our time and so much is hanging on us, we can't adapt. We can't adapt in that moment. So I think trying to keep capacity, whether it's mental capacity, financial capacity, time, trying to keep a reserve. In the military, you have a QRF, when you see a quick reaction force, some reserve people or some reserve plan that can come wading in. I guess for much of our lives, our parents are our QRF. My daughter broke her arm last week. And I was actually using Steve's breathing techniques as she lay ready to go into theatre, a few tears rolling down her cheeks, feeling a bit stressed and apprehensive. I said, Annabelle, just you need to breathe out, darling. Don't breathe in. Just take a few deep, try and blow my hand. But, there's skills we can accumulate. I think as business leaders, we should do those scenario plans. Obviously, you're kind of not expecting them to happen. I think even a moderate terrorist attack, you could plan. It's been more frequent recently, this pandemic, hard to plan for. And therefore, a lot of, as Steve was talking about earlier, a lot of agile and quick decision making has been needed across a variety of businesses to try and keep the wheels on. I
think, if I may, I think a key point as well with planning is certainly in organisational planning is the communication. Is ensuring that it's okay. You may have this plan in your head, but if that's where it resides, if it stays in your head, then actually, from an organizational perspective, you might be comfortable that if the worst happens, you're just going to do this. But unless your team around you
everyone else
knows that's what, and I think, in building team confidence and organizational confidence, that's really important. But I think, from a practical perspective as well, when things do go wrong, or occasionally, when things go pear-shaped, or, then everybody having the ability to just know this is what we do, off we go in this direction because this has just occurred. I think it can be really powerful. But communication's, I think, key when it comes to planning.
So there's some scenario planning we can do, and the communication is obviously key. Emma spoke about it last week, that getting yourself in the best possible position for race day, doing all of the inputs beforehand, can make the race kind of automatic, what you actually do when it comes to the race. Is that something you found, Steve, in your experience in resilience and coaching, that automatic kind of switch on in the moment?
I suppose, yes, I would say it is. But I think it's always one of those things that I think on the day, if that's how it occurs, then fantastic, that's great. And everything, everything aligns and you go off and you win a gold medal like Emma did, but I think you just have to be mindful. In one little bit of your brain, you just need to be aware that sometimes, there's always, you never know when there's something there, and it's without trying to be fearful of, but it's the being comfortable and confident that if this happens, then all I can do is my best, and okay, if the wind changes direction and I'm not paddling into the wind, but I'm paddling, with a sideways wind, it's going to be slightly different, but as long as you're comfortable and you've thought of it, clearly you can't think of everything, but if you've given it a good go to think of everything, then again, it just keeps you in that resilient state, I think, where pretty much whatever happens, I can give it my best shot. So yeah.
It's interesting what Emma's doing though, because she's building performance almost like a brick wall. You can only achieve the very highest level of performance in sport if you have the fitness, the flexibility. There's actually physical processes that need to go on to build that. So she then plans out all the sessions. You even need to know how much recovery you get. I mean, broadly speaking, as your fitness builds, you also accumulate fatigue. And when you take a periodical rest, your fatigue drops faster than your fitness falls. So you need to plan out, maybe 3 weeks of training and then an easier week. But she's planning in meticulous detail, more like an architect or someone building Eiffel Tower, how to get to the very top. Whereas for many of us, our plans are actually not about achieving a peak performance on a given day, but achieving a result over a period of time. And for me, that it is much more like cumulative effects, cumulative interest effects, where consistently planning to do and then consistently executing the same thing builds a disproportionate value over time. And
powerful planning, right?
Yeah, well, that's what. So you see this in our organisation. If you want to hit commercial results, you've got to have the steps in place on a day-by-day and week-by-week basis. You've got to build the right teams of people. You've got to have the right marketing. You've got to have the right intellectual properties, right innovation. You've got to have the right processes. But if you can build out a plan where those things are done consistently and done well, then over time you'll aggregate gains and achieve a greater and greater result. And I guess in the end, you could say, all profit comes from work or reward that is achieved that is disproportionate to the effort that it took. If you're running a company that takes more effort than you get back, well, then you're going to make losses. So we've got to work out a plan where the combined efforts of a team or of ourselves yield more than what we put into it. And my grandfather was a farmer, and when he was about in his 30s, he decided to move from a small holding to a farm. The first year he sowed his crops, the soil was so bad he got less corn out of the field than he put in. Which, if you think you're supposed to get a harvest 20 times better than what you put in, for example. So he put in his seed crop, and the soil was so bad he got a worse harvest. And that helped him realise what he had to do was improve the soil, and he got very, very good at that. And he actually became renowned and was actually asked to demonstrate that on a kind of national level, how to improve your soil. But I think that's the kind of thing that companies are trying to do. How can we create conditions? How can we create a soil that when we put in our effort, we get as easy as possible a disproportionate outcome? And that does require a detailed plan, but it's a kind of different style of plan than the plan that Emma's using to try and get to elite performance. It's more about consistency.
Yeah. I would say as well, that's the whole, if you're planning to succeed, and this is me shooting off the top of my head, I suppose, but I suppose if you're planning to succeed, you have to somewhere put in the mix. I think for me, learning is always a really important part of this, so the planning, like your grandfather, I think, really good example. I think, it's okay, I'm going to prepare to, I understand that my plan, this is going to be my plan, and I understand that I'm not going to be that successful. Now, he may well have been aware of that or not aware of it, but I think sometimes to build that bit of a fudge factor into things, to understand, that gives you, again, a bit of confidence that I might not get it exactly right, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to learn so much. So you set yourself that little bit in your brain where you're going to go, well, I'm not going to win the Olympics this year, but in just going out in a canoe, I'm going to learn some lessons. So I need to be open-minded. I need not to have filled my head with all the eventualities. I just need a little bit of space there in my head where I can go, noted, 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 need to change next time, noted, need to change. So I think being able to prioritize on the things that you do, but give yourself a bit of capacity, I think is really important when it comes
to planning up until that first contact that you mentioned. It's planning up until the point where you're going to get feedback, you're going to get inputs. Yeah. And some of the plan might be useless beyond that. What's the difference then between good planning and good prioritization?
Well, I'd like to add in on the planning. I think a lot of people fail to differentiate between the kind of futures that they're facing. Some futures are quite forecastable. So we can, if for example, running a sales team, I'm thinking about people here working for global brands. I can see some of our listeners. I know some of the companies. We can make a traditional forecast with traditional tools. It's a clear enough future. We can use forecasting. For some plans, there are just a few discrete alternative futures. So venture capital startup work is like this. We either will or won't get our Series A funding. We either will or won't get our Series B funding. We either will or won't get our Series C funding. So there's some very discrete alternative outcomes, and they are harder to plan for and they're harder to prioritize for because it's black or white and only one of those is good. Sometimes we've got a range of futures, and I think in the pandemic where our traditional forecasting is broken down, that's what we've got. We've got, will customers buy a car in the next 2 months? No one really knows. We've got a whole range of scenarios that could happen. And then the final one is true ambiguity. And I think that's where there's literally no basis for a forecast. And that's what some of the smallest startups, there's literally no basis for a forecast. But I did see there's a guy who's made an app that creates widgets on Apple iPhone. Apple gave developers 12 hours to create apps for their new launch of iOS 14. He managed to create an app in 12 hours, and it was the top app outperforming YouTube and anything else that might be downloaded for about 4 weeks once iOS 14 was launched. So he had literally he'd made hundreds of apps. Some of them had been okay, nothing massively successful, but a small change in the market conditions allowed him to create something that's been the biggest app in iOS this year. So we can prioritize, but it depends on the kind of future that we're working in. If we're obviously in the first kind of future that's very forecastable, it's very easy to prioritize and to kind of work out what we need to do. But as that clarity disintegrates, our ability to be really clear about what the priority is perhaps diminishes. And we're then left working from kind of first principles, I think, which is what we intuitively think is the right thing to do, even if we can't plan. And that's still a very relevant way to make decisions about what to do. You know that feeling, Steve, when it's a very dark night and you can't see the stars, you can't see your compass, and you've got to try and intuit which is the way home or whatever. There are very ambiguous. Have you ever been truly lost, Steve, like that, where you just don't know which way you're supposed to go?
A couple of times, I'm sure
Yeah.
I've been lost lots of times. But,
I can remember being in the outdoors in those situations. I think sometimes that intuitive, you try and work out your strategies for where to go, but sometimes you just need to make a judgment based on your intuition and follow the course. And you might end up wandering in a huge circle, but sometimes just moving anywhere is better than being stuck where you are.
There's that range of futures then. There's a clear future, an alternative future where we've got options, range of futures, and true ambiguity.
Yeah.
What examples should we be looking at when trying to navigate which one we should use in a scenario?
Well, it's good to be able to distinguish the types of futures that we can have. So the tools are quite clear for the clear future. You can use traditional forecasts. You can look back at last year and add or take away a percentage. For alternative futures, you can look at each of the options and say, well, there's only 3 options going to happen. If 1 happens, I'm going to do A or B. If 2 happens, I'm going to do A, B. Like if you don't get your Series C funding, you've got very limited options for how you're going to grow your scale up. I think the range of futures is more challenging because, let's say you've got 16 or 20 horses in the Grand National, but they're all at the same odds, right? It'd be very hard to know what's going to happen, and it'd be very hard to make a bet. In fact, if they were clearly ranked with odds of favourites, you could make some kind of alternative futures plan. But if you had a real range of futures, it's hard to plan. And I think then perhaps it's good to look within and think, what do I really want here? And, if any of these things happen, what are contingency plans I need to have in place?
Okay. And then looking towards prioritization, which is a big part of planning. Why is it we don't always prioritize what's most important, Steve?
Steve probably does.
that is a really good question, isn't it? I think sometimes we can become confused. I think sometimes we can become overwhelmed, and certainly, in the trauma management area that I work, that is something that we definitely, I suppose guard against, but try and make people aware of, is this sense of overwhelm, and not being lost in the clutter. Because certainly when the pressure's on, you can start worrying, losing that confidence, and thinking about all these various things. And I think so understanding that, having something that you jump to in the military, going back to those days, you'd have a standard operating procedure, which I know a lot of companies have. So it's something that you jump to automatically if this was sort of to happen. But I think being able to focus on something rather than other things, certainly when we look at coaching, and I covered it in the book, and if you look at your choices and consequences, I think that gives you a very good idea of where, you look at your choices. What choice have I got? What are the consequences, good and bad? And then almost leave it to, how you feel about it, as Jonna just said there, just that finger in the air. How do I generally feel about where's my heart at the moment? And that can often give you an area where to, prioritize, to practice that discernment. Because I think we often go off down, certainly when we get a bit worried or anxious, we can start worrying about lots of different things. And so having the ability to prioritize your life, what is the crocodile nearest the canoe type thing, is really important.
Yeah, it's our ability to deal with that overwhelm and think through our different options at one time. Jonna, help us out with some habituators in planning and prioritization, which feature in the book at the end of each chapter. What kind of things can we be doing to help us plan?
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm a kind of more spontaneous person who's less likely to plan. I'm quite imaginative though. So I think one of the things that we can do is try and understand, is to do the process steps to achieving our goals. That is very helpful. I really like using the power of our imagination and the mental rehearsal that goes with that. There's a lot of sports psychologists would recommend that mental rehearsal. I think also to tune into and assess that plan regularly. I think a lot of people find that the plan they start off on isn't actually where they want to end up, but they don't stop to assess how it's going. You see this with people. Someone once said to me, it's all great climbing the corporate ladder, but make sure the ladder's against the right building. We can get on board a train and fail to check that we might want to get off at other stops. So to have that constant assessment, but the paradox is, obviously, the more you keep questioning whether you're doing the right thing, the less motivating it is. So it can be good to work out when is an appropriate place to check that you're on track, rather than having this lingering sense of always, questioning it. And I think the other thing is to be challenging in a plan. And, you'll see this, Chris, in our office. People put out the plan. They've done their best work. They need a kind friend to then go and challenge it to make sure it's robust. And I think sometimes in organisations we're too fearful or too nice to be robust with each other. Steve's cat's arrived. And it's good to surround ourselves with people that will challenge us and say, if we're going down the wrong track, say, Jonna, this is not going to be good for you, or it's not good for your business, or it's not good for your family even, or is this good for your health? I'm very interested in Facebook about how many of the school parents are massively promoting how much they're drinking through lockdown, and everyone else saying, yeah, this is great, we're going to get through it through drink. It's like, I'm not sure this is really the good friends who are saying, actually, that won't help you in the end. Yes, we need to escape a little bit, but let's not use social media to promote getting smashed every night because our kids are home from school. I mean, it's tough when our kids are home from school, but good friend would say, let's do this as best we know how. So
that kind challenge can be a really helpful check of a plan. But that's all we've got time for. It is 2:00 GMT, so we have got to close the show. But join us again tomorrow. We're going to be back again 13:30 GMT. Thank you, Steve and Jonna, for joining us. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.